Great. Well, as I say, welcome to the last in our series on the interior castle. We've come right to the end of the book now, the kind of climax, which is the final chapters 3 and 4 of the seventh dwelling, and then her little epilogue at the end. So it seems to me that the central theme to these final chapters isn't so much talking about mystical experience or, all the stuff that she's been focusing on for so much of her book. Um, we've just had that in the earlier part of the seventh dwelling place, but now she comes to the effects that this has on your ordinary life. And of all, I think the dwelling places, I think this little nugget has so much to help us who are not necessarily enclosed nuns, monks, hermits, anchorites, whatever. We're not following that kind of religious life, but we live within the ordinary world, and we live with this desire for union, I suppose, union with God, to know God better and intimately through Jesus Christ. So that desire that so many of us have for, I guess, what you would call the contemplative life, and our actions having to work in the world, how do we hold those two things together? And I think Teresa's got some really interesting tips and help for us in the way we approach that. So the effect, what is the effect of this prayer of union? How is the interior world in which she has spoken about this ecstatic sort of vision of the Trinity, how is it manifested externally in the way you behave or what you do, so all that different way. So Teresa's really quite clear that all the trials that we have in life don't suddenly go away as if, you get into the state of union and you sort of waft through life, then it's like, oh, everything's lovely, so it's not like being high on drugs at all. She says, that she still gets all the trials of life, but the soul is primarily at peace. It's a bit like, just let Elizabeth in. It's a bit like that she's within the center, the heart of her soul, where she sees Christ enthroned. And in a sense, that's her whole, or the whole of her, the orientation of her life. And so things happen externally, but it doesn't actually touch this central part of her soul, because she knows and she's knit and she's living the life of Christ within herself, even though she experiences outside all the daily trials. Much of this book has been Teresa reflecting on her own experiences, which she often describes as being that of somebody else. But we also see how her words here are then also expressed in her own life. So how does her knowledge of union or spiritual marriage, how does it manifest within her life? Well, what's quite amazing is that we see this, person who is writing, who is standing up to authority, who is founding convents, who actually has an incredibly active, and one could even say, political life. And yet she tells us of these experiences deep within her soul, that she is still in union with Christ, and yet she is able to function and do all these incredible things that she does. probably because she has this interior knowledge of union with God that gives her that strength that whatever happens out here, however awful things are, it doesn't actually, it's not the final word. So the central effect of this union, as Teresa describes it, is therefore that one might live like Christ. And the fruit of this spiritual marriage is good works, is service. And that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because often we think of the mystic or, the contemplative or the religious as being sort of cut off from the world. They don't have to deal with all the stuff of life. And actually they sort of working with prayer. Prayer is their work, as Benedict says, actually. But she's saying that if you want to know the actual the quality or the union that exists between the soul and God, then you will see it in in their works of service. The interior calm fortifies the person so that they can actually endure much better. So they still keep this calm, even though their exterior lives are absolutely normal, really, I guess, and buffeted around. And that they got the strength to endure, and they've got the strength to then serve, because it's not actually them anymore. It's them living in and through Christ. So Teresa emphasizes that these works of service, well, they can be outstanding, like we know she did, but they can be also just serving in the place where you find yourself. Not about grand reputation or grand gestures, but in the little things, in the small things. And I think how often we talk about that in preaching and in teaching and in the gospel, is that it is actually the little things in life, the little acts of service that actually can really transform the world, as well as those big, outstanding acts of service like Teresa does. There's this wonderful line, and I think you find something similar to it in Teresa of Calcutta. She writes, "The Lord doesn't look so much at the greatness of our works as at the love with which they are done." Christ will join our sacrifices, our acts of service, with those that he offered for us on the cross. And then she says, "Thus, even though our works are small, they will have the value our love for him would have merited had they been great." I think of all that we've read, I think these are the words that are going to keep coming back to me, that will really resonate and live in my life. So also there's another aspect that I suppose I personally have found very helpful, and it'll be interesting for you to have a look at this for yourselves, is how Teresa actually reads that biblical story of Martha and Mary. There's not much in it, but the way she reads it is really quite interesting, really quite novel and extraordinarily helpful, I think, for us today. So if you remember, there's the two sisters, one who's rushed off her feet, and then this amazing young rabbi, Jesus, comes to the house, and one of the sisters is running around trying to make everything wonderful for them, just as you would, for him. And then there's the other one who's just sitting at his feet, listening to what he has to say. And one sister says to another sister, just as, you can hear it. It's so ordinary life. Why aren't you helping me? Get her to come and help me. And of course, Jesus's line, Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. So these two people and Jesus's words to them, they've been interpreted in numerous ways across history, not just in their context, but throughout the history of Christian spirituality. From the earliest period, Mary and Martha were seen to represent two different states. One was the active, one was the contemplative. So a life of service in the world or a life of prayer in a monastery or convent hall. So very exclusive in themselves and actually quite separate. And we've also heard from that scriptural reading that one is already being given a more of a value judgment. Okay, one is better than the other. Now, what got mixed into this, I suppose this patristic commentary on this passage was all Neoplatonic thinking about the superiority of contemplative prayer, that desire, that goal to be in union or to have knowledge. So that hierarchy of knowledge, if you remember, you have the one and then you have the coming down of knowledge to sort of us, and then the task for us is to go back to the source of all knowledge. So automatically you can see how contemplative prayer is to be more important, because that's the one that steps you back to union or knowledge of God. So you can already see that the way it was being interpreted was very separate. It was very hierarchical, and this became really established. And it was even used by the Cloud author in his 14th century text, where he argues that contemplative life is better than active, and he's quite harsh in his demarcation of the two and also how one is better. And of course, in that atmosphere, we have to always also take into account that the Cloud author is trying to speak into and against those people who are actually rubbishing the contemplative prayer life or the contemplative life and saying, oh, you're not doing anything, you're just wandering around, sort of head in the sky and everything. So he's trying to emphasize that, no, the contemplative life of prayer is really important. So it's only later, after the patristic sort of period and, later into the 13th century, that we really begin to see all of this being reanalyzed and given in different interpretations. One of the interesting people who do this is Meister Eckhart. And of course, he's writing about the 13th century, a bit before the Cloud. But what he does, and is because he's a brilliant writer, and he's often pushing at the boundaries of church doctrine and thinking. And so what he does is he literally inverts it. So he says, no, it's not Mary who's superior to Martha. It's actually Martha who's superior to Mary, because what Martha has actually done, she's so advanced now in the contemplative life, the life of prayer, that she now can work in the active world and yet still have a contemplative life. So that's quite an interesting development. And Teresa, you can see immediately, is also talking in to that whole tradition. And in a way, she's connecting a little bit with Meister Eckhart, because she is seeing that Martha and Mary, contemplative and active service. They're not separate, but they're absolutely linked. And that what is affected by the life of union, by the life of prayer, is service. So you have to have Mary and Martha together. And I find that, and that's a bit like Meister Eckhart, but of course he's not, he's very much into the inversion of hierarchy, but Teresa's not. She's into the bringing the two together. They're not separate. Contemplative life is only better in that sense, because what is better is that it is service in and through the person of Christ. So what she's saying there is that, only the contemplative life can be seen as better because it actually integrates our life with the life of Christ. And that means that when our acts of service are done, then they are done through the humanity of Christ. So it's not like I'm going to go and do my prayer life over here and now I'm going to be nice to people. And it's actually all about what I do. What Teresa's saying, no, that sort of, the little butterfly needs to be released so that you live the life of Christ. If you remember, she gets that bit from Galatians muddle up, my life is hid with Christ in God. She can't remember where it comes from, bless her. So she's saying that when you, in the seventh dwelling place, that your life is hid with Christ in God. So how you pray and how you act in service is no longer about you anymore. It's about Christ through and in you. So I find this view, I don't know how you think about it, but I find this view extraordinarily helpful because of our lives that we live today and how we can integrate all that Teresa has been telling us about the inner life of prayer. What we can expect, what will be easy, what will be difficult, what will be the beauteous comforts that we have. All that, and she integrates it then into what we do in the world. It's no point praying if prayer is not then broken out into making a difference in the world. If we hold it here within us, then we're just being covetous, I suppose. And also, it's not about us. That's all I can say at the end. So our lives are about service in this world, but with this inner life of prayer. And so, in a sense, it's right and good that we strive still to be united with the bridegroom in this spiritual marriage that she talks about in the seventh dwelling, so that actually what happens then is that our service is deeper and better and more altruistic and more loving and actually more revealing of Christ's love and desire for healing in his world. So I admire Teresa enormously, and I admire how she ends actually all this enormous book about prayer and the inner life. We're talking about service in the world, service to others, which is incredible if you think about it. But anyway, so that's me. Hurrah, hurrah! We end the interior castle. Whoa! And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen once again, so you can just see the questions. Now, what I've done this time is I've tried to keep the questions quite simple, because I think tonight is a real opportunity for you just to look back on the whole book. So I haven't focused too much my questions on, you know, what do you think about this dwelling place or these chapters, so that you have a chance just to sit back and say, well, what did you enjoy about this book? What did you least enjoy about this book? My phraseology is a bit weird, sorry. What would you take away from it? What have you learned? How has it helped you or spoken to you? And, you know, if you recommended this book to someone, what would you say and why would you recommend it?